Welcome, Zita. I am looking forward to this conversation with you and seeing you in a couple of weeks in London. It was the thing that I did for myself as I was entering the sort of solstice period. I was like, oh, dance and rituals and systemic work with Zita. Yes. So the way that we're going to do this is start with a sort of intro. Part of these conversations or series of conversations that we're going to be doing is partly about introducing people to the different flavors of Constellations work and the different ways that practitioners lean into their life experience, the other kind of therapeutic backgrounds or other work contexts that they use when they're facilitating as well. And just talking a bit about the sort of lineage of the work as well. So would you be up for just introducing yourself in whatever way feels right today?
Sure. Well, hello, Jamie, and thank you so much for having me. It's gorgeous to be with you on a fresh, bright, sunny January Monday morning. So I am a systemic constellations coach and therapist. The therapist bit is I'm a certified clinical hypnotherapist. And I guess, well, I think I started my training in 2003, and by 2005 I moved back to London and started practicing as a hypnotherapist. And then by a series of beautiful coincidences, I discovered Bert Hellinger and started my training with him in Bad Reichenhall. And ever since then, I have been deeply immersed in the world of systemic constellations, hypnosis, shamanic work. I think it was probably what I was born into, and all kinds of other things, traveling around the world, training, exploring, discovering. And here I am now in London in 2024, and I have a private practice, Life Therapy with Zita, where I work with individuals one-to-one. I do couples therapy, and I work with organizations, and I run workshops in systemic constellations. And now this year we are launching into movement and creative dance background from ballet, fusing it with the work that I met when Bert was later on in life, which was spirit movement and constellations and some ritual and some expression. And yeah, that's me.
Thank you. I'm just kind of noticing how I'm feeling really alive in my body and excited, particularly at the sort of movement element of this. So I'll do a little introduction to me as well. I'm Jamie Colston. I've been sort of in systemic work since 2011 when I first met a head teacher of the school that my son now goes to as a 15-year-old. And she said, do you know about systemic constellations work? And I said, no, what's that? And she said, you have to meet these people. And then the conversation went in a completely different direction to the one that we were planning to have. And I met Jane James and Terry Ingham, who introduced me to Judith Hemming, and I trained with Colpi in 2012, and then carried on doing sort of personal work for a long time, and recently did the foundation training in family work and applied, and started this is my second year of practice out in the world, and I think the things that I also lean into are somatic and embodiment work, dance, from doing 5 rhythms practice for a long time, and then other practices which are my own, which mix a lot of different practices together. And I was dancing this morning actually before we had these calls, and just really noticing how things like dance and Feldenkrais and like all of these sort of movement embodiment practices are part of opening ourselves up to flow and movement, and noticing the bits where we're stuck, and how useful that is in constellations work as a facilitator, holding space for other people as well.
Yeah, well, I have a very strong feeling about movement and, you know, progressing what felt to me, when I first went to that workshop with Bert and I saw this work, it just simply resonated with me really deeply. And uh, even though I was new to it, my first thought was, this is something for the future. And this summer, I went walking up in the Yorkshire Moors and the Dales, retracing the path of the ancestors who came from Lancashire and Preston to Barbados to survive. And whilst out there, there's a sort of kind of bleakness and the sparseness and the expansion of it. But there was also, a truth about Quakers. They quaked with the word of the Lord. And these concepts about movement and spirit and moving through our body, we do body work to transmute the trauma. It came to me like, I don't know, I just had this sense the rest of this year is going to be a bit hectic. And it feels like there'll be a need to create spaces where people can come and literally move what's been going on through their body. And so I put up violence and conflict, and then this. And that was it. That was my program pretty much for the year. And it definitely feels like we are in a time where movement is so important. And it's also a way, it seems, by bringing bigger numbers of people working on the bigger fields of collective trauma, we don't really have time to kind of go one by one by one by one to the arc. We need to do collective trauma collectively as a shared experience and transmute it through the body. So that's how I got to this event that's coming up with Sian Palmer on the 25th of January.
And before we go into that, will you just tell me a little bit about tell us a little bit about your relationship with Sian and where that began and how the sort of collaboration came together?
So I think it must have been 2 years ago, Tanya Mayberg invited me to teach class with African Constellations. So I ran a class for her school down there. And as often the case during lockdown, everybody met online. I met tons of facilitators all over the world. And it just so happened that a year and a half later, Tanya came up to London. And I met her. And we went for lunch, and it was really nice. And we had a really good old chat. And she went back off to South Africa. And I thought, well, there's another facilitator I probably won't see again until we're online. And she came back to London to do this movement workshop, and we met for lunch again. And she said, oh, there's someone I want you to meet. And Sian came along, and I was like, oh, wow, who are you? And we just had the same sort of similar instant connection. And I think a lot of her reminded me about something about myself at the age she is now. And there was that kind of bright shininess. And I was like, that's just so fabulous. And then, she had to go off and take care of her child. I went about my way doing all the things that I do, daydreaming and seeing clients and what have you. And one morning I woke up and I was like, oh, I should do this with Sian. So I sent her a message, and I sent her a link to a piece of music that I'd been kind of obsessing over. And I said, I want to do something with this, and this is the kind of music. And she sent me a piece of music back, and I was like, oh, you completely understand. And that's how it happened. And then we had some meetings, and I was like, are you sure? Because, literally, she's going to have a baby any day. And she's like, oh, I'm so ready for this. I need to do this before. And I was like, okay, the stars are aligned. Let's do it. That freeness of spirit and trust in life that she has. Yeah, the baby will come after, and we'll do this before, and we'll go on, we'll pick up and keep going once the baby's 3 months old. I just really resonated with that fearlessness and that courage to trust that everything will fall into the right place. And that kind of synergy is very liberating when it comes to collaborating. the safety of
mm,
just really trusting that I've never seen her work, but I just know that from her music that she sent back and as an answer to the piece that I sent her, it's going to be absolutely fine. It's going to be better than fine.
mm,
She's a fire sign, you know?
mm.
I mean, I love all signs, but fire signs are bonkers in the most beautiful way. When I say bonkers, they're like fire. It's unpredictable, but it keeps you warm and
Mm.
everybody can gather around it.
And it just sounds such a beautiful, flowing, clear, strong, joyful place to be.
Yes, yes. And it feels it. And it's interesting because I feel a little bit guilty
Mm,
because so many of the stories around us at the moment are how much people are struggling. And I was like, and even in my own family, people are struggling. And I can be aware of that. But I'm also aware that I came to this work to not be struggling, but also be joyful when life was difficult. So there's the guilt, and then there's the innocence of it's taken a lot of work to come to this place in life. It doesn't mean that I'm perfect or fixed, but I can see both aspects of life simultaneously. It can be challenging and hard, but it can also be joyful and beautiful. And that's what this is really about. I mean, I think that's part of the very Africanness of me, that, the vastness of life is that there is no real concept of the future in East Africa. It's this moment. And your hut is
mm.
burning, leopards are running through the savannah, but you're all alive.
Um, being curious about the name, which is Eve's Domain, and just how did that name arrive with you, and what do you um, uh, what's brought into this space that we'll be in together um, because of that choosing?
Okay, so it goes back to being on that walk in the summer on the Dales. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dales, it's slightly different to the moors, but it's beautiful. And there's such a kind of openness. And I think I was born up in that part of the world anyway. My parents would frequently, as a child, take me up. They go driving and walking across the Dales. And I don't know, I come from a line of people who are very comfortable with having conversations with nature and listening to what nature whispers in our ears. And I was with someone who's processing some of their own ancestral trauma in a different way. But I realized that once you get past a certain field, like past the grandparents, the great grandparents, the great great grandparents, and let's say people who are talking about slavery, those are in the field of the long dead. There aren't even records of their names. But there is no sense in that whispering or that conversation in nature in which they are not smiling on us. Their survival, wherever they are from in the world, is for life to go on. And we are that life. And in order for it to go on, there has to be a certain smiling with life, an agreement with life for its ups and its downs and its beauty and its wonder and its sheer magnificence. And when you go out into those spaces in nature, you come into contact with the magnificence and the enormity of it. We're less than the size of a pin drop. We are literally ants. So the combination of that, being out there, thinking about those Quakers, and what was interesting is it was often the women who went first on ships in the 1600s, 2 by 2, to spread the word of the Lord. And it's like, you know, there are people who are afraid to get on a plane and go to a modern city where there are taxis. Imagine going from Lancashire to a tiny island in the middle of the Atlantic. It's like these women, oh, they're like Eve. They defied God. They said, it may be tough, but I'm going to do this anyway. And that's exactly what Eve did. She said, you said don't eat it. Oh, wow, now I've got access to all this information. And this is my domain. I've created it. It's outside Eden. Eden's lovely, but it's stagnant. I've been to Eden. You go out to Tanzania, you go out deep, 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 thousands of miles away, or, however many miles away from a big city in Savannah where you can see 45 kilometers clear. That's Eden. And it's beautiful. It's magnificent, but it's fixed. Outside that, which, now it's a reservation. Outside that is everyone else other than the Maasai. That's Eve's domain. And we can make heaven or hell of it. And for me, there's something going through this women empowerment course that I've been running, that women aren't claiming Eve's energy. But I do know that I came from a line of women who did. And I need to take the gift they gave me, which is to break the rules. That's what they did. And they were very powerful women. They still are. They terrify me. They're the only people on the planet who terrify me because they're unstoppable. So it was the culmination of all of these experiences out there with only sheep and grass, some Wensleydale cheese, and this open sky that created the space to think differently to how one does when one's in, a lovely suburb in Zone 2 of London. I went wild, and we need to go wild.
Yeah, I agree. Your story also reminded me, and my mum pops into my head because she grew up in Burnley, and there's lots of stories of her sort of going off into the wild, and I was with her. I think it was just after COVID, and I'd kind of driven down to London to see her, and we went out to one of the sort of wilder places just outside of Sutton, in the woodlands, and we were talking to trees together, and I just remember, that's part of the lineage of what I grew up with in terms of talking with and being part of this sort of beautiful world that we're deeply connected to and that is part of us.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. Trees are fantastic to talk to. And I like the trees that not just talk back, but touch back. So when you're in Barbados, we have these dwarf coconut trees, and they're also for listening, talking trees. And they can also attest if people are telling the truth. Because when you sit under them, if you're speaking from an open heart, the fronds of the trees come over you. They start to stroke you. When you're not speaking from the truth, they retreat and pull all the way back.
Wow.
That's why Barbadians are such straight talkers.
Yeah.
They know they can't get away with it. So yeah, that's where that comes from. But I think it's a wonderful thing to do, and it's. I was thinking about this thing a kid had said to me a few months ago: is what happens if the mind has a mind of its own? And I was like, well, this kid knows. Of course, the mind has a mind of its own, but the mind of its own is nature. And we free ourselves to have a discourse with that mind of our mind that's got a mind of its own by talking to water or trees or to the sky or even to God, if that's what works for you, or the ancestors. But it's very rare that what they say back is going to be suffer more. It's never been my experience that they say suffer more. That comes from the mind. And when we go into movement, we can start a discourse with the mind of our mind. And I really find that something quite precious, which is available if we don't have the opportunity to go into nature And actually, the location that we've chosen is almost like a kind of concrete play den. I mean, when I first went there, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then beyond that, but that's also the jungle, really, of urban life that we live in. So it makes sense to put it in the jungle of urban life, because there is still plenty of antennas to connect with and through each other there. Why not? And it's called Bolney Meadow. I was like, how did this place get to be called Bolney Meadow? But of course, it's telling you the spirit of what's underneath what was there before. And then you discover that there's no tubes in that part of London after a certain point because it was wetland. You can't build a subway down there. And then you picture the meadow and you're in accord with the current reality and the past reality, and the past reality is where the ancestors are. So I'm glad you're coming.
Yeah, me too. It's funny because it started at the same time as sort of stepping into Constellations work as a sort of outward practitioner, is that I started organising Kayleys and again, a sort of, I mean, it came from being at Shambhala Festival and then going to the team, kind of gathering afterwards, an award ceremony with a friend, and being part of a Kaylee, which was just extraordinary. Like, it was just a really different experience to what I've had with the dance, the way it was danced before. And one of the things that I've learned since is that Kayleys aren't just dancing. It's it is a Scottish Irish heritage of also having conversations and being together as a community in movement. And there's something about dancing together, regardless of form, that just, it's like moving in, like the personal body, but moving in the collective body, then bringing in the sort of the wider sphere of the space that we're in together. And it is like a fully embodied connectivity to things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a language all of its own. I had happened across, because on Instagram I'm kind of one of the, I post and get off because it's an overwhelm of information, which is sort of just it's a lot. But it was one of those moments where the algorithm was really kind and it threw up this video, and I was looking and I was like, this is really mysterious and mesmerizing. And what it was a Maasai male dancing with an Hindu Indian woman. And I was like, that's extraordinary, because it those two people, representative of those two groups, speaks truly, literally to something ancient reconnecting in the present. So I don't know if you know much about East African history, but the Hindus were all shunted out in a really quite horrible way. But if you go back, Africa used to be called Ethiopia, the whole continent. And then India and northern India used to be also called Ethiopia. And you had Ethiopia 1 and Ethiopia 2. So out of East Africa, you have Dravidians, who then became the people of Southeast Asia, and so on and so forth. So to see these two reunited, reconnected after a split that happened a few thousand years ago, dancing with each other, I was like, oh, that's what we have the capacity to do with movement and bringing people together. The submerged separations that live beneath the skin find each other in this natural constellation that is not contrived or created by the facilitator. They do it. And through movement, they can create a language that speaks to the soul of the other and brings about resolution. It's mysterious. And we don't need to understand it. It's not for our cognitive minds to make sense of. We need to bypass that. Get into the exchange, the transference of healing and redemption and resolution and acceptance on a cellular level. I mean, even towards the end of last year, I caught myself and I was like, after a while, you kind of maybe taking quite a bit of information, you see how little invitations there are, especially if you read newspapers just to kind of keep up with world events. You see how little invitation there is to go, wow, life's wonderful. Mostly it's about what's missing, what's wrong, what's absent. I remember there used to be this wonderful newspaper. It was called literally Positive News. I used to love reading that, but it was also a bit boring. So you do need a bit of balance, and humans like drama. They like to sort of mildly catastrophize in order to spur them on to greater things. It's like what keeps us going. Oh, a leopard might come out of the bushes any minute. Oh, let's read The Guardian. Shit, it's all terrible. You know? And then I find myself thinking, oh God, it's all awful, and then feeling that closing down in my heart when I think about some story I've read about what's going to happen in the future and the reality and so on and so on. That isn't reality. That's somebody's story, and it's a story, and there are many ways to tell a story or tell a story about something. And, mostly we're consuming information that comes from 23% of the world's population. When you step into what the other, terrible at maths, 70 whatever, are talking about, is that, oh, wow, oh my God. It's like discovering the Orinoco River. All of a sudden, it's like there's this fluidity and there's this flow, and you're like, whoosh, yeah, life is amazing. Amazing. So I like to swim up the Orinoco more often than, poking around in the mud flats of the River Thames. I mean, there are treasures there. You can find some beautiful Roman clay pipes, but you've got to mix it up.
Is there anything that you feel like you'd like to add, like thinking about our conversation as a whole?
Well, I think with all the things and what excites me about this, it's a first. And I know with first it's possible the dream number of people coming won't be that. But I'm also reminded that, all great things start with a tiny raindrop. So whether it's 3 or 10 or 40, I'm grateful for that. And why I realized I could be comfortable for that, because there is a lot of sort of darkness, but the word that keeps coming up is we're also moving to an age of enlightenment. There's some stale, rank ideas floating around in the ether, and it's like, yeah, those are tired, which means there's going to be something new starting to emerge. I don't know where it's going to come from, but I'm all up for it. I'm all ears flapping. So having these conversations with you and creating these things that are kind of pushing the boundaries and are experimental feels in harmony or rhythm with that. And I know that people who are willing to engage with those experiments in the early days, the early adopters, the ants who have the willingness to stick their head above the parapet, these are vital energies, and there aren't many of us, but we can start. And so that I'm really glad you're going, and whoever listens to this is an invitation. If you feel yourself to be one of those who's brave and courageous to test out new dimensions and ideas and experiences as we forge into an unknown future, join us. And it's take that chance. I'm taking a chance. I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. I'm trusting spirit and souls and ancestors to come through and like give me the gift of the gab as it always does. But at least the music's going to be good. And once you've got good music and space, I mean, seriously, what can go wrong? I feel right. That's literally
Yeah.
what it is. It's a disco with a guided meditation instead of cocaine and alcohol. What's not to like? So bring your feathers and bring your scented oils and put a feather in your cap and also just I want it to be have that playful element. Of course we're healing things, but as an East African, there's a joy in healing. Otherwise, how do you generate the energy to invite in the light to illuminate the darkness? That's where we're going. That's where I'm traveling 2024. Whoever's on the right, ding, ding, let's go.
And I think I'm just leaving with this kind of image of a baby being born into that movement fairly soon afterwards as well, which just feels
Right.
like a
Oh my,
blessed
oh my
time.
God. Maybe she'll call,
It's like,
yeah, she'll be like, I'm a systemic child. Yeah. So roll up, everybody. Come dance. Get your boogie down. And I look forward to seeing you there leading the way. I know you can move, Jamie.
thanks. I'll bring my feathers.
Good. Yeah.
Thank you so
It's
much.
something different. Thank you so much for having me. And it's been a joy to be here and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.